The time is now for the Talk About Sports podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and I am in my 8th year working alongside Bob to originate our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I am joined by our digital media specialist, Grant, a Nebraska football fan, and it is an absolute nightmare for him on our college service this week as we're backing Indiana -6, and we're rolling with Jeff Sims stepping in at Arizona State.
Yeah, the Indiana pick, made me throw up immediately. But then I get hit with Jeff Sims betting on Arizona State. He's the worst Husker quarterback I've ever seen. The guy played 5 games, threw 1 touchdown, 6 interceptions. Middle of the season, quarterback gets hurt. He has to come in for 1 play, immediate fumble. So I'm thinking this bet is all about Scattaboo, who might be the most electric running back I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I think Ashton Jeanty might have a couple of things to say about the electricity there. I think Ashton Jeanty has been even more electric than Scattaboo. But going back to Sims here, the line moved from +2.5 to +6.5 when Levitt was announced out, and Bob just thinks that's a little bit too much. Our metrics indicates that it should only be about 3.1 points because Levitt himself hasn't been that accurate this season. He has basically the same completion percentage that Sims had at Nebraska. Levitt has been great when he's taken off and scrambled, but we know Jeff Sims can do that as well. So I think that the market moved a little bit too much. We would have had Arizona State as a best bet with Levitt at +3. The strong opinion if it would have been at +2. And so now when we're at, +6.5 here, we don't think the drop off is too much because we like Dillingham as a play caller. So we that's why we grabbed the +6.5.
Well, hopefully we don't see too much Jeff Sims. I want to see Arizona State in the wild scat formation. A lot of that. But let's jump into our first segment here, Tan. And we got the free bet of the week. And last week we had the Bengals -3.5, which now makes us 10-3-1 on podcast sides and totals dating back to last year. But who are you going with this week?
Eagles -3, and that's good. If you have to take a little bit of juice up to -120 there. I think that the number from a power ratings perspective should be 3.5 here. And then just from a matchup perspective, it's looking good for the Eagles on both sides of the ball. Starting with the defense, because New York is going to be without star left tackle Andrew Thomas. He's worth 1.1 points by our metrics. And backup Joshua Azidu has surrendered 5 sacks on only 170 pass blocking snaps last season. He's going to struggle across from edge defender Josh Sweat, who is 10th in pass rushing efficiency. In New York, they've talked about potentially going with Evan Neal at left tackle too, but he was terrible. He was benched in the preseason for a reason because he surrendered a 10% pressure rate last year. So I think it's going to be a huge game for Josh Sweat. And then Philadelphia's other best pass rusher, Jalen Carter, is going to be going against the Giants' other worst offensive lineman, Greg Van Roten, who surrendered the 7th most pressures among guards this season.
Yeah, not great matchups up front, but what are you expecting from the Eagles offense this week? They're coming in with some injuries again.
They're going to be missing left tackle Jordan Mailata and tight end Dallas Goedert, worth 1.6 points, but that's factored into our model number here. I don't think that the Eagles are going to need to drop back too much. They're going to feed Saquon Barkley against his former team. The Eagles are 5th in rush success rate this year, and New York's defense is terrible against the run. They're surrendering 5.2 yards per carry. That's 31st in the NFL. And then when Hurts does need to drop back, I think they're going to get some pretty good matchups on the outside for A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith because the Giants call single high covered safeties at the 9th highest rate in the NFL, and Philadelphia's yards per pass play is 24% higher against single high than two high because they can get those wide receivers, kind of matched up one-on-one on the boundary, and that's exactly where Hurts wants to attack you. So, like I said, power rating-wise, we should be at 3.5 here, and then matchup-wise, I like what we're getting from the Eagles here on Sunday.
All right, well, we need to go over the 2 big wide receiver trades that just happened. So let's start with Davante Adams to the Jets.
Yeah, and I wanted to clear up a little bit of confusion I've seen online about us releasing the Rams earlier this week. So when we sent that bet out on Tuesday morning, it happened to be 20 minutes after the Davante Adams trade, and we moved the line like we usually do from -6 to -7. And we've seen some buyback now because people are like, well, Davante Adams, we knew he was going to be out. Why is he worth 1 point to the point spread? But we already had that game circled well before the Davante Adams trade to release in our normal Tuesday morning time slot. And we would have bet the Rams regardless of if Adams, because he wasn't going to play for the Raiders anyways. We knew that. Yeah. So we would have bet the Rams regardless. And, now we're seeing a little bit of Cooper Kupp positive news. But we like the Rams in this game, regardless of if Davante Adams was traded or if Cooper Kupp plays here.
All right, well, thanks for clearing that up. But how do you think he fits into this Jets offense? I mean, Adams led the NFL with a 32% target share in his last season with Aaron Rodgers.
Well, I mean, I think Adams is still elite. He's 10th in success rate among wide receivers this year. I mean, it's 31, so he could get, it might not work, going forward in the next few seasons, but, the Jets are all in right now. Rodgers is 40. So I think it's a good move for the Jets. He's worth 0.9 points to the Jets offense by our numbers. And New York is second in neutral pass rate over the last month. And I expect Rodgers to keep slinging it with the addition of Adams. I mean, you look at it, Adams, Wilson, Allen Lazard. This is a really good wide receiver group. I like the offensive line. I think this Jets offense is definitely trending up after this trade.
Yeah, they are scary. I mean, talk about two beast running backs too. So they're deep there, but we got to talk about Amari. I mean, he's free. He's free from Deshaun. This is a great move by the Bills.
I think so. I mean, Amari's averaging 1.23 yards per route run fewer than he did last season, but that's due to some drops and just awful quarterback accuracy. Underlying metrics, though, Amari's average 2.7 yards of separation is his highest since 2018. So that's kind of an indicator that Amari just hasn't all of a sudden lost it, right? He can really help Josh Allen. He might need to help him right away here because Josh's normal top guys are in difficult matchups here against Tennessee. So Khalil Shakir on the inside, probably going to struggle a little bit against nickelback Roger McCreary, who's second in yards per cover snap allowed in the slot. And then we know that Josh has loved to target his tight ends this season, but Tennessee's defense is conceding only a 35% success rate to opposing tight ends this year.
All right, well, what does this trade mean for the Browns side of things? I mean, who's going to step in and take these targets?
I think it's going to be Cedric Tillman and Jordan Akins. I mean, that's kind of who's got to get more routes here. And those guys are averaging 0.54 yards per route run, which is less than half of Cooper's already bad 1.08 yards per route run. And so, I mean, Deshaun Watson, he struggled against single high coverages all season. Now without Cooper, I don't think he's going to be able to do anything against a Bengals defense that's 10th highest in single high safety shells this year.
Yeah, it's not looking good for them. Well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got stock up, stock down, and whose stock are you buying this week?
Well, I'm going basement shopping here because I'm buying Tyler Huntley's stock. It probably couldn't be lower, right? He's averaging 4.4 yards per pass play, but this really should be the most favorable matchup he could possibly get on Sunday coming off of a bye. So you just look at the way Miami runs offense. They're much better against zone. And, just with McDaniel's scheme, he loves hitting the holes in zones. The Colts run the second most zone in the NFL. The Colts defense has been terrible versus motion this season, allowing 22% more yards per pass play than when teams don't motion. Dolphins lead the NFL with a 78% motion rate. And the Dolphins offensive line, it's been a little bit shaky this year, certainly against the blitz, but the Colts have a 77% standard pass rush rate. That's fourth highest in the NFL. And it doesn't look like they're going to get DeForest Buckner back this week. Jalen Jones is surrendering the 10th highest yards per cover snap. He's going to struggle against Jalen Waddle. I mean, this Dolphins offense is built to beat defenses like Gus Bradley's. So if it isn't now for Tyler Huntley, it's never. I certainly think he's going to average more than the 4.4 yards per pass play that he has thus far this season.
All right, I like that. Well, whose stock are you going to be selling this week?
I'm selling the Raiders defense. They are overrated due to the schedule they've played. So they've allowed 27.2 points per game to the Chargers, Ravens, Panthers, Browns, Broncos, and Steelers. So Baltimore is the only offense in that group with a success rate ranked above average. In fact, the worst 6 offenses in success rate this season are the Browns, Dolphins, Titans, Panthers, Broncos, and Chargers. The Raiders have gone against 4 of them, and they're allowing 27 points per game. So, I mean, once the Raiders start playing some actual good offenses like they do this week in the Rams, everyone's going to see this Raiders defense for the train wreck that it is, especially without Christian Wilkins.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the injury watch, and it looks like the Colts are going to be getting back Anthony Richardson, but they're going to be without some key pieces on this offensive line.
Yeah, and I think it's becoming clearer and clearer by the week that Richardson is worse than Joe Flacco. You look at the EPA per play, Richardson negative 0.03, that's 29th in the NFL, compared to Flacco's 0.25, that's fifth. I think everyone is kind of under the impression that, the Colts offense would be better with Flacco, but they have to play Richardson, right? They have to keep him in the saddle to develop him because they're not going to win the Super Bowl regardless. And he's their one shot to win the Super Bowl, 2-3 years from now, if they can really get Richardson. But I think, this week in particular, and in the next coming couple of months, we know this offense is going to be worse with Anthony Richardson, particularly because they're without two starters on the offensive line, like you mentioned. Ryan Kelly went out last game and looks like he's going to be joining guard Will Freeze on the sideline. So we got backup center and backup right guard against Zach Sealer, who ranks 8th in pass rushing efficiency among interior defenders.
Looking at the Lions here, they just lost the heartbeat of their defense. Just a brutal injury for Hutch here.
Yeah, it looks like he's going to be out rest of the season after surgery to repair a broken tibia. And Hutchinson responsible for 55% of the Lions' pressures this year, making him the most indispensable pass rusher in the NFL. Last year, Max Crosby led the league, responsible for 41% of the Las Vegas pressures, and Hutchinson was on pace to blow that mark out of the water. Our metrics indicate Hutchinson is worth 2.3 points to Detroit's defense. But the less discussed thing that's happening here this week for the Lions defense is they also lost starting cornerback Carlton Davis to a concussion last week, and backup Kendall Vildor is going to struggle mightily when he is lined up across from Justin Jefferson, who's worth 5th in EPA per target.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if the Lions try to make any moves for a Reddick or a Max Crosby here this week. But let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the weather of the week. And what are you seeing out there, Tan?
Well, there's really high winds and rain predicted in London on Sunday. But, Grant will put up a picture of the stadium right now. But Wembley Field doesn't look like U.S. stadiums. All of the stands are covered from the rain, but the field is not. And because that roof kind of slopes in, I'm not sure how much the wind is going to get into field level there. So if this was the U.S. stadium and I was seeing these weather conditions, I'd be talking 5 points worse than average scoring conditions here. But I'm not sure how much that is going to come into play this week, just based off of the stadium design for Wembley. And the other thing to note here is that it's a new grass field at Wembley. So we don't know the condition that's going to be in. We certainly saw earlier this season in the Brazil game that the grass was really hard for those pass rushers to dig in here. So I don't know. I'm seeing clear under weather conditions here. But I don't know how much to really, value that in this particular stadium matchup. Now, as far as home field, I think the Jags are worthy of 1 point of a kind of a quasi home field here because they were already in London. They didn't have to travel this week, and they should be more adjusted to the time zone.
All right, well, while we're talking about that game, what'd you take away from Drake Maye's debut?
Well, New England's offensive line was just as shaky for Drake Maye as they had been for Jacoby Brissett. Maye was hit on 19% of his dropbacks, but he did show some composure back there. He averaged 0.68 EPA per play versus the Texans' blitz, including an 11-yard scramble. But Maye ultimately finished with just a 44% success rate in the game. I think Maye is certainly looking more composed in the pocket, more mobile in the pocket than Brissett was, but he's going to have to be because the Patriots are playing backup tackles, Jacobs and Thomas, who combined to surrender 3 sacks last week. And the Jaguars have good edge rushers, right? We see Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker have combined for 47 pressures this season. I think they're going to sack Maye a couple of times this Sunday.
Yeah, I was really impressed with how he could throw the deep ball last week, but is he even going to be able to do that in this weather?
That's the big question, right? If the wind really does get into this stadium, it's going to take away all deep passing for both offense in this game. But he was great last week. The Patriots had 4 passing plays of 20 yards versus Houston after accumulating just 6 such plays in the first 5 weeks. So Maye is certainly adding an explosive element to this offense, but I think he's going to have to move more towards the screen game in this weather. The Patriots are targeting running backs at the 8th highest rate in the NFL, and Jacksonville's defense is allowing 0.44 EPA per target to opposing running backs out there without, linebacker Aluakon on the field. That's 31st in the NFL.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our DraftKings player of the slate. And last week we gave out CD Lamb, who had 14 targets and a rush, but he did not convert anything into a touchdown. But what are you going with this week, Tan?
This week, I'm going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown at 8,300. So he had a season low 15% target share against the Cowboys, but he will be a major aspect of the game plan on Sunday in a significantly more favorable matchup to him because Minnesota's nickelbacks are allowing 0.41 more yards per cover snap in the slot than Dallas nickelback Jordan Lewis. And I think that Jared Goff has shown a lot more ability to hang in pockets this season. He was 6 for 7 for 178 yards under pressure versus the Cowboys last week. And he's going to need to stay composed this week because the Vikings have a 52% blitz rate. But, Ben Johnson has done a great job attacking the blitz this season. Detroit's yards per attempt versus the blitz is a league high 35% more than its yards per attempt against a standard pass rush. So I think Goff is going to see the blitz and get the ball out really quickly to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra in for a huge game on Sunday.
I love it. They've been fun to watch. That Dallas game was crazy. Well, let's shift it over. We've got our primetime preview. We've got the Jets versus the Steelers, and you actually released a bet on this game earlier in the week.
Yeah, we went with Jets -1.5, and that's good to -2. The Jets offense looked really promising in Todd Downing's first game calling the plays. They had a 73% motion rate, which was up from 47% in the first 5 weeks. We talked about how we love the addition of Davante Adams. We think that this offense is getting about a point better there. Maybe Todd Downing is worth a half point for the better play calling than Nathaniel Hackett. And the Jets, the one thing that they've really struggled against this season has been the blitz, but the Steelers aren't going to blitz them. They have a 75% standard pass rush rate. So we really like the Jets offense in this matchup.
Yeah, we know the Steelers might not blitz, but the issue is they're going to get to you because they got TJ Watt and Cam Hayward.
Yeah, and that's kind of how they have been disrupting opposing offenses this season with those two guys in the standard pass rush. But I feel like the Jets have a good counter. I think that the Jets' two best offensive linemen are going against Cam Hayward and TJ Watt. So we've got left guard John Simpson ranked 6th in pass blocking efficiency against Hayward, and then right tackle Morgan Moses returned to action last week. He did not allow a single pressure against the Bills, and I think he'll at least contain TJ Watt on the outside there.
Well, we had Breece Hall over receiving yards for our primetime prop last week, and he ended up with 5 catches for 56 yards. And is this going to be another big spot for Breece Hall?
I think so. I mean, we talked about last week how he kind of struggled against the Vikings and Broncos because he had to be more of a pass blocker in those matchups. But the Steelers defense is allowing a 56% receiving success rate to opposing running backs. That's 29th in the NFL. And I think we'll see Breece as a receiver much more like we saw last week against the Bills than the 2 previous games.
Yeah, the Steelers have quietly had a really good year, actually, but Tomlin just surprised us in his media interview, and he said that they're going to hand the ball over to Russell Wilson.
Yeah, and I don't really agree with that at all, especially in this matchup because the Steelers are now down 3 starters on the offensive line with Zach Frazier suffering that ankle injury last game. So now no Zach Frazier, no James Daniels, and you've got Quinnen Williams and Javon Kinlaw across from Mason McCormick and Ryan McCollum on the interior. That is going to collapse a ton of pockets against Russell Wilson, and he's much more of a statue there than Justin Fields. And then on the outside, you've got right tackle Broderick Jones, ranks 48th in pass blocking efficiency out of 49 qualifiers, and he's got to go against Will McDonald, who has 7 sacks this year. So when you're talking about, a huge advantage for the Jets defensive line against Pittsburgh's offensive line, I'd much rather have the more mobile Justin Fields back there that can at least, kind of run around and break a big scramble for you than Russell Wilson, who's much more of a statue.
Yeah, it really doesn't make any sense there. But what are we going to see from this Jets secondary? I mean, it looks like they're going to be without DJ Reed and safety Chuck Clark, who left last game in the first quarter due to an ankle injury, and he did not return.
Yeah, and so I think normally that would be a pretty big problem, right? Missing one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL in Reed and a starting safety. But the Steelers really only have one wide receiving pass option here in George Pickens. So you could just put Sauce Gardner on George Pickens in man coverage. We know that Arthur Smith's offense struggles much more against man coverage than zone. They're averaging just 80%. Their yards per attempt against man is just 80% compared to their yards per attempt against zone. That's 29th in the NFL. And Arthur, his offense has always been much better against zone, dating back to, his time as offense coordinator in Tennessee and Atlanta. So I think the Jets, they are 7th highest man coverage rate in the NFL, and they'll basically just put sauce on George Pickens and shut down this Steelers offense. Our model favors the Jets by about 1.5 here. So we think the line is fair, but the matchups just significantly favor New York in this game on Sunday night.
Okay, well, we've got one more thing, and that is our primetime prop. And you are 18-8 dating back to last season after Breece Hall cleared with his receiving prop last week. But what do you have for us coming into this one?
Well, we're going to head to the Monday night game, and I've got Mike Evans over 4.5 receptions. So Chris Godwin has been the big story for Tampa Bay's offense this season with a league-high 70% success rate, but he's going to have to go against Marlon Humphrey in the slot, who's the best nickelback in the NFL. And I think that Evans is going to have a lot more favorable matchups on the outside against rookie cornerback Nate Wiggins. The Buccaneers have risen to 8th in neutral pass rate over the last month, and I expect them to keep throwing the ball because the Ravens are conceding a league low 27% rush success rate. So I think a ton of targets are going to go to Mike Evans. I think over 4.5 receptions is the best way to play that.
I love that one. Well, before we go, I need to get your thoughts on the Super Bowl rematch. I mean, just over 6 months later, the 49ers remain a short favorite over the Chiefs, and San Francisco's down safety Talanoa Hufanga and all-pro running back Christian McCaffrey, while Kansas City is missing Rashee Rice, and the defense doesn't have all-pro cornerback L'Jarius Sneed anymore like they did in February.
Yeah, so, some changes, but like you said, the market remains the same here. San Francisco installed as a short favorite. Now, a change I think is going unnoticed this season is Brock Purdy is so much better than he was last year. Purdy has increased his air yards per attempt from 8.3 to 10.0 while lowering his turnover-worthy play percentage. Basically, he's cut that in half. So he's throwing it deeper and taking the ball and taking it out of harm's way more often. Purdy is the 3rd highest graded quarterback in the NFL by our metrics. And we're not the only one that thinks Purdy is absolutely dominating this year. He has a 1.33 WAR on PFF, wins above replacement. That's the 2nd highest in the NFL. So I think if San Francisco wasn't, if the record was better, and I think it will be going forward, I think they're certainly going to make the playoffs. I think Purdy would be getting some MVP buzz, but because they've had struggles everywhere else on the offense, Purdy's not getting the hype that he deserves because he's playing a lot better this season.
Are you worried about their ground game at all, though?
Well, I mean, Mason stepped in. He's done well, right? I mean, Mason's actually leading the league in forced missed tackles this year, but the Chiefs are a much better rush defense this year than they are last year. They're 7th in EPA per rush allowed. So I don't think that Mason is going to have a huge game on Sunday. I think when McCaffrey does eventually come back, it's definitely going to help them more in the passing game than the ground game because I've been kind of impressed with what Mason has done so far.
All right, well, looking at the Chiefs offense, I mean, it is much different than it was last year, but what are you expecting them to do?
Well, I mean, it's all about the tight ends now, right? With Rashee Rice out. And I think, Travis Kelce could have a decent matchup here because, like you mentioned earlier, Hufanga is sidelined. Now, San Francisco's defense has really relied on Nick Bosa on 3rd down, just, wrecking the game. He had 14 pressures last week, which was tied for the most by a player in a game over the last 4 years. But that was against 3rd-string right tackle Stone Forsythe. And I think it's going to be a lot, it's going to be more of a battle for Bosa this week across from Jawan Taylor, who ranks 15th in pass blocking efficiency. So our model favors the 49ers by 0.7. So, short favorite, basically pick here. But Mahomes is 16-2 against the spread from dog to -2. So if you made me take a bet in this game, I'd lean with the Chiefs here.
Yeah, I am really looking forward to that game, but I think that will do it for our Week 7 preview, and make sure to head over to drbobsports.com. We got all the free analysis there, and we'll be back next Friday to preview Week 8 of the NFL. So as always, thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe.